So I thought I'd begin this morning's Bible teaching by showing you a photograph of a baby seal. Don't you think baby seals are pretentious? I realise that as Canadians, the instant you see a photograph of a baby seal, there's something within you that wishes you had a hockey stick in your hand with which you could club this baby seal to death. You're denying it, but it's true. This is one of the things that makes us Canadian. We like to kill baby seals. I think we should put it on our advertising. Come to Canada, kill a seal. For every jar of maple syrup you buy, we will kill 2 baby seals. A few years ago, when Canada was in a dispute with the European Union about the killing of baby seals, this image made a lot of people in our country feel rather proud. So this is the former Governor General of Canada, and in this photo she's seated with some Inuit around a disemboweled seal feasting upon the grimy contents. Now the point is this. In the Inuit seal hunt, they find a use for every part of the seal. Nothing is put to waste. The flesh, the blubber, the offal, the skin, the eyeballs, the teeth, you name it. They use it all. They use it all. And I was thinking about that this week because I suppose that very few of us have lived a fairy tale life. We are glad, of course, that some people have. We are glad that some people fall in love and stay in love and live happily ever after in happy homes with happy children and happy successful careers and happy health and all that. But that perhaps has not been our story. Our story, perhaps, is that we got involved with the wrong person, that the thing we invested years of our lives in ended acrimoniously, things we tried didn't work. Our story is that our best intentions were mocked by the cold and the cruel realities of life in this world. Our story is that in the hunt for life and love and prosperity and happiness and health, we ended up with our fair share of mess and disappointment and ugliness and slime. And to tell our story truthfully, we must acknowledge that some of that disappointment and mess has been of our own making. Not only have we gone through things that we wish we had not gone through, but we have done things that we wish we had not done. And all of that is part of our story. However, unlike the good bits, we just don't know how to talk about it. We don't know what to make of the ugliness, of the shame, of the mess, of the filth. And so it is in this morning's final teaching in the book of Ruth that we turn our attention to the bowels of life, to the mess, to the shame, to the embarrassment. So we're in chapter 4 of Ruth's story, verse 10. In which one of the main characters, a man called Boaz, whom we have learned is a man of means, a man of standing, a man of gravitas in his community, says to the people of his village, "I have acquired Ruth the Moabite as my wife." Now, one of the things I love about the story of Ruth is that it doesn't even try to tidy up the tale that it tells. Notice then that whenever the writer of this story talks about Ruth, he talks about her as Ruth the Moabite. It's always Ruth the Moabite did this, and Ruth the Moabite did this, and now in the final chapter, I have acquired Ruth the Moabite as my wife. It's almost as if the writer of the story wants us as readers to be very clear on this point. Ruth is from Moab and is a Moabite. Now to you and I this means very little, but to the early Iron Age audience of Ruth's story, it was an ugly detail that wouldn't have made it onto anyone's Instagram. Because in the world of the early Iron Age, everyone reading this story in Israel would have known that the people of Moab were descended from an Old Testament character called Lot, and they would all have known that that story came from, it belonged in one of those special editions, Too Hot for TV, Jerry Springer episodes that makes you want to reach for your sick bag. The abridged version of that story goes something like this. There's this guy called Lot. This is early in the Bible story. And his two daughters are desperate for children. They don't have men. And so in their desperation, they devise a plan. And their plan goes like this. Let's get our dad drunk and sleep with him. You go one night, I'll go the next night, and hopefully together we'll be able to have children. And when you read that story in the Bible, you're thinking to yourself, no. Like, there's got to be plan B somewhere. This is one of those stories in the Bible where even Satan sits up and says, dude, are you serious? It's one of those bits of the Bible that is just sick and perverse and nasty. But that's what they do. And then the children produced from this nastiness become the progenitors of the people of Moab. And so in the early Iron Age, the people of Israel, conservative as they were so repulsed by this ugly story that they would have nothing whatsoever to do with anyone who came from Moab. The very term Moabite was to them a term of derision and repulse. To call someone a Moabite was to call them an inbred, sicko pervert. And so when the original audience of Ruth's story read the bit in chapter 1 where a good Jewish boy goes to Moab and marries a Moabite woman and then he dies, the assumption would have been that the reason he died was because he got involved with one of these women. And God didn't approve and God didn't like it and he got sick and it's never going to work out being involved with any of these sickos. Bad things always happen. And so if you're one of the original audience of Ruth's story, as soon as you hear the word Moabite, all sorts of negative associations pop into your head and cause you to think about Ruth in a certain way. And so if I were writing this story or editing this story, concerned as I am for propriety and the impression a story gives, I would 100% have edited out this detail. I'd have just called her Ruth. Ruth works for me. If I was going to stick a label on the girl, it would be Ruth the Attractive. Or Ruth the Loyal, that's nice. Ruth the Hardworking, Ruth the Industrious, anything in fact, apart from what she actually was. And yet he insists, time and time and time again throughout his story, on calling her Ruth the Moabite. This is deliberate. It matters to the storyteller that we know the mess, that we know the slime, and the shame, and the failing. Stepping out of the text for just a second and into our lives, may I ask you to think for just a second about the unpleasantness of your own life. May I ask you to think for just a second about the things that have not worked, about the smell and the ugliness and the shame and the mess that has been imposed upon you and that you have imposed upon yourself. Back to the text. In the next sentence, having said to the elders of his community that he's acquired Ruth the Moabite as his wife, we then read that the elders and all the people at the gate said, "We are witnesses." So this is the minute where the marriage register is signed, where the priest says, "I now pronounce you husband and wife, you may kiss the bride," and whatever. And then the people say something interesting. Look at what they say next. They say, "May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who built up the family of Israel." Now I say that's interesting because the word woman is a new word in Ruth's story. In chapter 2 and verse 10, when we were looking at that, We read that Ruth bowed with her face to the ground and said, "Why have I found such favour in your eyes that you should notice me, a foreigner?" So at this point early in the story, she's not a woman, she's a foreigner. And in the xenophobic cultures of the ancient world, foreigner was about as low as you could go. Then just a few verses later, she says of herself that she's a servant. So, a little bit of progression now. A little bit of upward mobility. Now she's not a low foreigner, now she's a servant. Promotion, good news. Then a few verses later in chapter 3, she says of herself, again in English, that she is a servant. But this word servant is the Hebrew word alma, which means a young woman who is available for marriage. This is the same word that the Bible uses to describe the Virgin Mary. The alma shall be with child and shall give birth to a son. So now this is more mobility. She's gone from being a nasty foreigner to a servant. Now she's a young woman able to marry, and that sounds good. But then in this verse, at the end of the story, she is called in Hebrew Isha, a woman. This is a word that describes someone who is fully integrated into her Jewish community. In a culture that respects wives and mothers, this is what wives and mothers were called. And one of the things I love about Ruth's story, in fact the story of the Bible generally, is there is this movement. It starts here very low. She's a foreigner. Then she's a servant. Then she's a young woman of marriageable age. Then she is woman. The story of the Bible is a bit like this. We go from sinner to saint. From lost to found. From broken to whole. From the fall of Adam and Eve all the way through to the city in heaven. There is this movement, this progression, this idea that where we are today is not where we will be tomorrow. This idea ingrained in the storytellers of the Bible that the past does not determine either the present or the future. There is always movement, there is always progression, there is always up and up and up and up and up and better and better and better. And in the plan of God, through the mess, through the ugliness and through the slime, it's going somewhere. It's always going somewhere. Somewhere better, somewhere new, somewhere different. And if where we are today is no good, I would suggest that's good news. Because too easily we define ourselves either by our past or by our present. We persuade ourselves that where we've been is who we are, and who we are is where we will stay, and this will not do. As readers of the Bible, this thinking is too defeatist, too negative. Who says, for example, that just because you've hitherto been unlucky in life, that you will always be unlucky in life? Where's that written in stone? Who says that just because you've made bad decisions in the past, that means you are incapable of making good decisions in the future? Where is that written in stone? Who says that because it's been horrible, 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 that it will carry on being so in the future? Back to the story. There is this notion in Ruth and in the whole Bible that people move in the plan of God from where they were to where they will be. And the Bible says God's plan for us is good, pleasing, and perfect. So the movement, we believe, is good. Anyway, the two women mentioned in this sentence, Rachel and Leah, are the big mother figures of the Jewish religion. And if you were one of these early Iron Age Jews reading this story, you would have thought about these women as being the quintessential good women. And so this is a nice thing that's being said to Boaz at the moment. What's being said is, hey, I hope that you and Ruth have a happy life together. I hope that, you live long, that you prosper, that you have children. I hope that your children live distinguished lives and have good marriages and make a ton of money, right? It's one of those things that everyone says. It's completely unexceptional, completely unremarkable. But what is remarkable is the way that they say it. Look at how they phrase it in the following sentence. I pray that your children go on to live distinguished lives. Through the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman, may your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. So the well wishes here are to the effect of, I hope you have a son, because sons are better than daughters. It's the ancient world. What do you want me to tell you? And I hope your son is like Perez in the Bible, who Tamar gave birth to in the Bible. Now once again, this is a detail that would have made the early Iron Age audience of the story reach for their sick bags. Because the story of Perez and his mother Tamar is beyond question one of the Bible's worst. It goes something like this. Tamar was a young woman, and her father-in-law was called Judah, and Judah had a few sons, one of whom was called and Tamar married The Bible doesn't say much about except to say that God didn't like him and he killed him. That's not nice. So what normally happened in that ancient culture was that when one brother died, the other brother would have to step in and assume the role of husband so that through him his dead brother could have children. We spoke about that weirdness last week. So whom God did not like and killed, had another brother called Onan, and he was a real sweet guy. He said to the widowed Tamar, I'm not going to marry you, no way. I'm not going to give you children, absolutely not, but I will visit you from time to time and I'll sleep with you. Nice guy. The Bible says God didn't like him, so he killed him. Actually says that. God didn't like him, so he killed him. Bummer for him. So then the young Tamar has to face the fact she's never going to have a child. And in the ancient world, this is a huge issue. Lots and lots of stories from antiquity are about the plight of childless women. Huge issue in the ancient world. Women in her culture would do anything they had to do just to conceive. So she devises a sick plan. She says, I've got an idea. I'll dress up as a prostitute and I'll go and hang out in the place where those people hang out. And when my father-in-law comes along, I'll put a mask on my face. He won't know it's me. We'll do the deed and I'll have a child. Great plan. At this point, Satan's going, dude, what's the matter with you? Well, you're sick in the head. This is nasty, this is filthy, this is mess, this is slime. So anyway, she does this, and she sleeps with her father-in-law. He doesn't know. Then 6 months later, she's heavily pregnant. Her father-in-law is outraged, and the scene the Bible tells is like the Jerry Springer show. The father-in-law is on stage, all self-righteous, shouting about how his daughter-in-law's a tramp, and his daughter-in-law's done this, and his daughter-in-law's sleeping around, and blah, blah, blah. And then, then Jerry Springer says, we've got a surprise for you. And she comes on stage and says, good news, you're the dad. We're having twins. So that's the story. And again, if you're one of the original audience of Ruth's tale, as soon as you hear mention of Tamar and Perez, all sorts of sick, twisted, negative associations pop into your head. This is nasty. And once again, if I was telling this story or if I was editing this story, there is no way that would be included. Not a chance. And would the story be any weaker for such editing? I don't think so. Why mention it at all? Why not just forget it? And yet he goes out of the way to mention it. He uses valuable parchment space. It's almost as if the writer wants us to know that in the background there is a smell. There is a nastiness. There is an ugliness. There is something horrible and shameful. Stepping out of the text, let's pause for a minute and think to ourselves, what about the unpleasantness? What about the things I tried that didn't work? What about the shame and the mess that was imposed on me and that I imposed on myself? What about that? What about the dark side of my story? Next sentence. So Boaz took Ruth and she became his wife. When he made love to her, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. Then we fast forward a bit. The son is born, and the women of the village say to the elderly Naomi, "Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you, and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth." Notice, please, the mention of love in that sentence. A few weeks ago when we started this series, several of you asked me why we were talking about love, why go on about it. And to me that question seemed akin to asking why we would be so interested in drawing breath or in eating. The reason that we must talk about love from time to time is because the whole business of loving and being loved in this life matters, it seems. Remember what Plato said. Plato said that the God of love lives in a state of perpetual need. And what Plato meant by that was that love to us is like hunger. It is like thirst. It is like eating. It is like drinking. It is innate to all of us. It is at the same time the most addictive, astonishing, beautiful, crippling, incapacitating sensation on earth. It is a narcotic, it seems, without which the passing of our sorry years are all the sorrier. It is, the scientists now tell us, the brain's greatest prize. And so it's right that we talk about it, right that we celebrate it, and right that we mourn it. So look at what the old wise women of the village say. The women who've lived a long time, who've seen a lot of things. They say that this love, this thing you've found, this love, is better than 7 sons. In ancient Israel, as I hinted at earlier, people preferred to have boys than girls. That was the world. And so the so-called millionaire family in the ancient world was 7 sons. If you had 7 sons, that was the perfect family in ancient Israel. And so to see that what Ruth has found, what Naomi has found, the love that this family has found together, it's better than 7 sons, is to say something remarkable. And perhaps it's the sort of thing that only an old woman can say. Because perhaps it's only when you get old, if you're lucky enough to get old, and you face, the winter of your years, what's important in life becomes much clearer than it used to be. It seems that the things that are really important to you when you're young or middle-aged are perhaps not all that important. Perhaps, paying off your mortgage in a hurry, or getting ahead, or getting on, or getting stressed about stuff. None of that at the end really matters. Maybe we realise that we spent our lives on things that aren't actually important, and perhaps at the end we realise that. And perhaps, as these old women seem to suggest, nothing matters more than loving and being loved, than having gone through this life knowing what that feels like to give and to receive. The end, I say this often, in the end, we all lose. Life makes losers of everyone in the end. That's the way it is. But where we have love, it is right to celebrate. And where we do not, it is right to mourn. Next sentence. Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him. So this is grandmother holding grandson scene. And I'm done. I'm done in this sentence. The story started out horrible, and now it ends up, everyone's in love, everyone's happy, everyone's got money, suddenly there's a future, and you've got a grandmother holding her grandson. Roll the credits. I am content, I've got my money's worth, it's finished, no more need to put ink on parchment. Boom. drop the mic, I'm fine. But we're not done yet. The writer of the story has a twist, a shock. He ends the story of Ruth by saying this. The woman living there said, Naomi has a son. I'm good. They named him Obed. And then the final sentence of this messy tale. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. The final word in the story, David. At this point, the original audience of Ruth's story would have been spellbound. Their jaws would have been on the floor. Did not see that coming. David, as you perhaps know, if you've even got a passing familiarity with the Bible, is the archetypical hero of the Jewish religion and faith. It doesn't get higher than David in Jewish thought. And so in this sentence, in the final mic-dropping moment, the readers have to get their head around the fact that Ruth, the Moabite, who came from a long, long line of sicko, inbred perverts, Ruth, who in the story, I actually, as a man, don't like her. I don't think I've said that to you in this 5-week series. I don't like Ruth. She's calculating. She's manipulative. Remember that episode? She walks into her target's bedroom at night and crawls into his bed and manipulates him into marriage. There's almost nothing about Ruth, save her industriousness, that I actually admire or like. She's willing to manipulate and seduce her way out of poverty to a better life. And that's Ruth. That's Ruth, warts and all. And yet she, who comes from such a bad lineage and who is willing to do such questionable things, becomes the grandmother of one of the Bible's greatest characters and gets a book of the Bible named after her. Not bad, sweetheart. Not bad. And bearing in mind that her progeny ends up being the great King David, and bearing in mind that the final word in the story is David, it is all the more remarkable that the story that precedes it wasn't edited. It's all the more remarkable that the smell and the mess and the offal and the slime were not sanitized even a little. And yet this is Ruth, and this is why I love the story. It makes use of the shadow as well as of the light. Nothing is wasted. Everything is used. And that lack of waste is informative. Let's just accept the fact that not everything we do works. Let's just accept the fact that sometimes life doesn't turn out the way we hoped it would. Let's just accept the fact that sometimes our good intentions are mocked by the cruel realities of life. Let's just accept the fact that some of the choices we make, though we thought they were good at the time, turn out to be not so much. Let's be honest and admit that sometimes, even though we know what the right decision is, we do the wrong one anyway. Right? The people we are in church or in LinkedIn or in Facebook, that's edited. That's not the whole story. The whole story has a shadow. And that's okay. Because if what we believe is true, I mean all of it, if there really is a God, and if that God really is, as the Bible says He really is, and if He feels towards us the way the Bible says He feels towards us, and if He loves us to the extent the Bible says He loves us, then why would that all-knowing, all-loving God be confounded by the twists and the turns of our sometimes messy life? If there is such a thing as purpose, and if that purpose is as the Bible says it is, then why would our worst decisions and most reprehensible moments be anything other than a mechanism for our redemption and our growth? Have a look at this. So this was written, I guess about 1,000 years, maybe slightly less, after the story of Ruth. It's in the New Testament. And it says famously, we know that in all things God works together for the good of those who love him. And that sentence packs the punch because of the phrase, all things. Because included in the phrase, all things, are things that we do not wish. Things that we would hand back if we could. Things that we don't enjoy. Things that we regret. So what about the unpleasantness of your life? What about the things that have not worked? What about the smell and the slime and the ugliness and the mess and the shame that has been imposed on you and that you have imposed upon yourself? Were any of those things good? Absolutely not. Would you hand them back if you got a chance? In a heartbeat. But are you still alive? Is there still life in you? Can, in faith, your future be better than your past? And can, in faith, the mysterious hand of God take you to a tomorrow that is better than your today? If none of that is true, then nothing we believe is true. If none of that is true, then everything the Bible says is wrong. It's going somewhere. Through the mess, through the long months. In all things, God works for the good of those who love him. God bless you. Thank you for coming. See you next Sunday.